once again, everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if this is your first time joining me today. Hi, my name is Hannah. I make a lot of different videos here on YouTube, sometimes tattoo related, sometimes story times, and sometimes true crime like this one. If you are new here or if you're relatively new to the channel, I definitely recommend that you check out the different playlists that I have. I know a lot of people, new subscribers, maybe older subscribers, didn't know that I've done true crime videos in the past and that I really enjoy doing those types of videos. I know I posted about it on the community section of my channel yesterday. So if this is something you're interested in, I do have other videos, but those cover missing persons cases rather than a case that we know exactly what happened. This is a case where we know exactly what happened. So without further ado, let me jump into the video. So if you see me looking down here, I just have my MacBook with my notes on it. I did a ton of research about this. I've done research about this in the past. If you've read the title, you know this video is about the Jonestown massacre, which is still one of the worst mass killings in American history. So anyway, I did a lot of research about this for this video, but in my senior year of high school, I actually wrote a paper about Jonestown. So I'm a little bit rusty. I mean, obviously I know the events that transpired, but I have my notes here just so that I can get everything correct, get everybody's names correct, all of that kind of stuff. Also, if you're not new to the channel, this is a new tripod that I'm using. My older tripod was taller, so if you've noticed that we're a little bit lower, that's the reason. Hopefully it doesn't bother you that you can see like the side of the bed frame here. I'm sorry if it does bother you, but anyway, I'm having to sit a little bit further back, so just kind of disregard that. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into this kind of, I don't want to call it a comprehensive look into Jonestown because there's so much information, so many interviews with, you know, people who were in the People's Temple. This is my comprehensive view. It is a bit of an overview with a little bit more detail. Obviously there's so much out there. I couldn't put it all into one video. So if there's something I don't mention in this video or anything like that, it's because there's only so much that I can put into a video. But anyway, let's get into it. So Jim Jones was actually born on May 13th, 1931 in Crete, Indiana, which is actually a really tiny area, I believe that I read, that's actually closer to the town of Lynn, Indiana. I don't know the proximity of them. I just know that in many articles that I read, it stated that he was from Crete, which was near Lynn, and he was the son of James Thurman Jones, who was a disabled World War I veteran. So, I mean, in my head, I'm kind of picturing this, like, I don't want to say like angry man. I don't want to call him angry because I don't know, but a lot of the things that I read about him were that he was just really disinterested in Jim. He didn't have any interest in really being a father to him. So that's just what I read about him. And Jim's mother's name was Lynetta Jones. And basically, since Jim's father was disabled in World War I, Lynetta had to kind of pick up the slack and work odd jobs all the time just to make their ends meet. So they were never, you know, a wealthy family by any means. I don't even know if they were middle class because the mom was the sole breadwinner and she didn't even have like a career. She just had these odd jobs, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that left very little time for Lynetta to actually be a mother to Jim Jones. And a lot of people think, as you know, is the case for many murderers, serial killers, things of that nature, a lot of the childhood abandonment maybe that he would feel had a lot to do with what happened later in his life. He was often left to his own devices. He was left to play by himself, to do everything by himself, really, because his mother was always busy with work and his dad was just not interested at all in being that father figure to him. So I think that played a big part in the feelings of like abandonment and being isolated and being alone that he may have felt, which would lead up to issues further down the line. But so that's what it was like. That's what his home life was like. I did read that when he was around the age of 8, 9, 10, you know, that kind of stage of his life, a neighbor started taking him to church with her. And, you know, Jim got really involved in all the different types of churches around the area. I read that he became really good friends with a Pentecostal minister, and he kind of just got really, really involved in religion, period. Like, he just wanted to learn about all the different practices and of the different religions and the way that things were and the differences between the religions. And by the age of 10, Jim was ready to start his own ministry, basically. He started ministering to other boys and kids in his community, which, you know, that seems harmless enough, but I mean, obviously with the events that transpired later in his life is a little weird. But when he was really young, like super young, like if you think about it, 10 is super young to start like preaching and ministering to your peers. I don't know. I think that that's a little foreboding, may we say. I don't know. For some people that can be great and they could turn out to be great ministers, but in this case it went awry. So that's what happened when he was around the age of 10. He was very, very studious, very, very involved in the church. And, you know, he actually looked down upon his peers who weren't as interested in religion and didn't want to study as much, and they just wanted to have fun and go play and go to dances and do all this kind of stuff, you know, normal childhood stuff, teenage stuff, preteen stuff, all that kind of stuff that you do when you're 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. He looked down upon his peers for this, and it was a fair amount of disdain that he had, because he felt a little bit isolated again, because the only people that he really interacted with were the people at church and the Pentecostal minister that he became friends with. So he just really did not fit in with the kids around him, and that's kind of a common theme in Jim Jones's life, is just not fitting in and not finding a place where he belongs. And I think that that's the reason he was probably drawn to religion and to ministry, is because if you don't know, if you're not a religious person, I've grown up in the Bible Belt. Church is it really emphasizes a feeling of belonging, because I know in many churches, if not all of them, the basic premise is that, you know, you belong, we're all God's children, all of this stuff. So it's not like there would really be an outsiders versus an inner circle. It was, you know, we're all God's children, all this kind of stuff. So I think that's why he was drawn to religion, because religion has a strong theme of you belong here. You know, there's no upper tier and lower tier. We're all on an even playing field. So I think that might have really, really drawn him to religion. So when Jim Jones was a teenager, his parents ended up getting a divorce. They split up, and he and his mother moved to Richmond, Indiana. And there he continued, you know, going to school, going to high school, all this stuff. And he actually got a job at a hospital as an orderly. And that's actually where he met his wife, whom he married when he was only 18. His wife's name was Marceline. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's Marceline. That's how it looks to me. And, you know, they got married very young. He was 18 years old. I couldn't really find how old she was, but I would assume that she's around the same age bracket. And later on in their marriage, they actually ended up adopting a lot of different children of different races, which Jones dubbed his rainbow family. Now, normally I would say that there is nothing wrong with this at all, and I don't know that there was any underlying reason why he did this. I don't know if he did this, you know, out of actual love for these children. I think it's very possible, but I just think that the way that his ministry ended up going, I believe that this was a strategic move in adopting these multicultural, multi-race children. I say this because when Jim Jones actually began his ministry in 1952, he got his job as a student pastor at the Somerset Methodist Church, which was a church that was located in a very, very low class, predominantly white area. And Jim Jones, really, the foundation of his ministry, I believe, was faith healing and really trying to bring together different races. So that's why I say that I think that his rainbow family, to me, it could be either a strategic move to further his ministry and prove how much he loved every race, or it could have been a genuine thing, you know, where he genuinely loved these children, so he wanted to adopt them. And if that is the case, I don't want to take anything away from that. I'm just saying I think that it could be viewed as a strategic move if you view the way that his ministry ended up going. So like I said, he was a student pastor in 1952 with this Methodist church, and not long after he started there, he gained a lot of confidence in himself, and he began pushing the church toward integrating a white and black congregation. He was really, really pushing for that because he wanted the African American community, the underrepresented communities, he wanted to bring those together, and, you know, the white group together and just have this integrated church. He really, really wanted and strove for the multiracial, multicultural church. So like I said, within a year of working as a student pastor at this church, he was pushing them to go toward a more racially diverse congregation, and the church did not share his enthusiasm whatsoever. I think that one of the main reasons that he wanted to attract the African American community, these underrepresented communities, is because he had gained kind of popularity as a faith healer, which, if you don't know what a faith healer is, it's basically where in the congregation someone is sick, like let's say someone is wheelchair bound, okay, he'll go to the wheelchair bound person and put his hand on their forehead or just hold his hands up in front of them, and they will allegedly be healed and start walking around through the congregation. I know that there is footage of him doing this. I want to see if I can find it so I can put it in this video. I don't know if I can find it. Maybe I could link it if I can't find it, like to put it in the video. I don't know, but I've seen this video of Jim Jones doing exactly what I just described to you, and it was later found out after that it was all a ploy. Like, he knew the woman, he told her to do this, I think he may have paid her to do this, and it ended up being very, very bad for his ministry. So like I said, the Methodist church that Jones was working at, they basically kicked him out. They said, you can't work here anymore, you can't be a pastor here anymore, you've got to go. So in 1955, Jones formed his own church, which he called the Wings of Deliverance, but that was later known as the People's Temple. And the People's Temple is basically just racial integration and faith healing. That was the main sole purpose of this church, at least at the beginning. So you have to admit here, it's an admirable goal if done in earnest, okay? It's an admirable goal in my opinion, to fight for a racially diverse church, even when, you know, the people around you, the churches around you that you've worked for, they're not up for it. It's an admirable cause to create your own church for this purpose. But my issue lies in the treatment of the members of the congregation and the faith healing aspect. Honestly, like I said, it's admirable if done in earnest, but I don't believe that this was done in earnest. Maybe at the beginning, maybe. But I believe that the things that Jim Jones did were all strategic, planned moves. That's just my opinion. I think that that's the way that it is. So Jones formed the People's Temple, and basically the way that he would attract new members was by word of mouth with current members, and he bought some time on local AM radio stations to broadcast his sermons, which, I mean, that is a good way to reach people. So for a while there, that's what he did, you know, spread by word of mouth, AM radio stations broadcasting. But by like the beginning of the 1960s, he was ready to move the congregation to California. And this part right here is where things get dodgy for me personally. The reason that he claimed that he was moving the congregation to California from Indiana is because it would be safer in the event of a nuclear holocaust. Now, I believe this is around the time that Jones began getting addicted to prescription drugs. That was a problem that he had throughout his life. Many people have come forward and said, yes, Jim Jones had a really bad drug problem. Everybody knew about it. It was just a really unfortunate situation, and I think that heavily contributed to the events that transpired. So they moved to California, and it was only Jim Jones, his wife, the children, and 100 of the People's Temple members. I don't think everyone came along, just 100, and they went to the remote desert towns of Ukiah and Redwood Valley. I believe I said Ukiah, right? I'm not sure. So that's where they kind of stayed for a little bit. They were still a little bit off the radar, just in those remote desert towns. But by the 1970s, Jones did move the People's Temple to San Francisco, which is where they picked up a little bit of momentum. He became, you know, really interested in ingratiating himself with politicians, with local radio stations, like everybody. He had his hand in everything. So he was really just trying to get his name out there, trying to spread his message, okay, in San Francisco, which is where he got a lot, like his congregation grew massively. I think it's really important to note that Jim Jones had high charisma. I don't know if you guys know someone or have known someone who is extremely charismatic and extremely manipulative and good at getting you to believe what they need you to believe, but it's scary. It's like borderline mind control, honestly. If someone is that charismatic that they can get you to believe anything, that's horrifying to me. And that's exactly what happened in this situation. You know, that Jim Jones, he ingratiated himself with these politicians, these news reporters, just general people in San Francisco, and his congregation just exploded. He had hundreds of new followers just extremely quickly. It was like overnight almost. It exploded. Just because of his message of faith healing and integration. The vast majority of his members were African American, but there were pretty much all races in his congregation. So as Jones's congregation grew, it seemed like the treatment of the members grew worse and worse. Reports started coming out from people who defected from the church saying that members were beaten, you know, they were abused, humiliated, all of this kind of stuff. And possibly more disturbing, members were talked into giving Jones all of their possessions, signing over the deed to their homes because he said that they didn't need earthly possessions and that it should all go to the church. So that is a humongous red flag. So these reports started coming out. Also, reports started coming out that Jones was telling people that they must denounce romantic relationships. Meanwhile, he was having these affairs and he was having children out of wedlock. It was a big fiasco, honestly. So in 1977, when these reports were just, coming out of the woodwork, seemingly, reporters started asking questions. And it's at this point that Jones kind of felt the heat. He was embroiled in numerous affairs. He was mistreating his congregation members. He was taking all of their possessions, and he was addicted to prescription drugs. So he had this whole web woven, and the press was closing in on him because he was having dozens of defectors come out and say, this is what happened when I was a member of the People's Temple, and other people corroborating those stories. So he was really feeling the heat. And so this was the point at which he decided and made it public knowledge that he would be moving the congregation of the People's Temple to a place called Jonestown, which was in Guyana. So Jones had actually been having Jonestown built 4 years prior to this. So in 1973 is when the construction on Jonestown began. And to me, that just says that he knew that he was going to be found out. He knew that things were going to go awry, and he was going to have an escape plan. And to me, that should have been the biggest red flag to everybody in America. Okay, when things are closing in on someone, there's a fight or flight response. Everybody knows that. It's human nature, fight or flight. So obviously, when all of these reporters are poking around, asking all these questions, asking about the well-being of members of the congregation, when he says that he's moving them to another continent, that should be the biggest red flag for investigators, for law enforcement, for everybody involved to say, hold on, why is this man running? He's fleeing the country with all of these people, all of their possessions, taking their passports upon arrival. We need to figure out what's going on here. So Jonestown itself was sold to the members of the People's Temple as the ultimate paradise, when in reality it was more akin to Paradise Lost. So basically, they were told, we're going to have this self-sufficient community. Nobody will have to, talk to us or come see us or anything. It's just going to be a great community, and we won't need anybody's help. We'll be self-sufficient. We'll grow our own crops. We'll have our own medical center. We'll have doctors, all of this kind of stuff. It'll be fantastic, there will be no racism, no classism, nothing of that nature. We'll all be equal. We're all God's children. So honestly, it was sold to these members as paradise, as everything you could ever want, heaven on earth, basically. And in reality, it was more like hell than heaven. So the members that went over to Jonestown, which was, I believe, around 950 people, 900 people, somewhere around that number, the people who went over there were, beaten, given very little food. They were often made to stay awake for more than 24 hours at a time because of Jones' increasing paranoia of the United States government and that someone was going to try to get him, all of this stuff. His increased paranoia led to these loud, constant sermons over the loudspeaker. And the loudspeaker was set up in such a way that you could hear it throughout the entirety of Jonestown. So there is absolutely no way that you can escape this. So that's a lot of the time why they would be up for more than 24 hours. Also, there was no way to grow the food there. The soil was not good. They were in the middle of the jungle. It was basically a carved out circle in the middle of the jungle. And the soil really was not good. A lot of times members would have to go into the neighboring town and buy food or beg for food or steal it or rummage through the garbage for food, stuff like that, just because they could not grow the food that they were meant to live off of. So because this place was basically hell on earth instead of heaven on earth, there were many armed guards around the edge, the perimeter of Jonestown, so that no one could escape, no one could leave. Jones had their passports, their money, everything they owned. They were basically stuck in Jonestown. And even worse than this is I've talked about his paranoia already, but as it increased, he started forcing members to participate in loyalty tests, as he called them, where he would wake them up in the middle of the night randomly, and he would hand them a cup of a liquid, and they would be told that has poison in it, drink it now. And if they drank it, they passed the test. If they showed any hesitation whatsoever, they would be beaten. They were told that they needed to submit to Jones's will and do what he said because he wanted the best interest of everybody and all this stuff. So it was absolute insanity. So in late 1977, a lot of reports about Jonestown were coming out. They were very unsavory. They were telling the truth. All of this horrific activity was being leaked to America. I'm unsure of how they were getting these reports. I'm assuming maybe Jonestown members got a hold of their family, but it was ultimately family members. Even if they weren't contacted, it was ultimately family members of Jonestown members who got such a big stir that Congressman Leo Ryan of California decided to go and investigate Jonestown for himself in November of 1978. So it was Congressman Leo Ryan, Congresswoman Jackie Speer, and some NBC reporters, camera crew. It wasn't a ton of people, but it was a group. So they headed off to Jonestown, and they were welcomed with a warm welcome and a celebration. Everyone seemed to be saying the same exact thing, that they loved it there, that there was nothing bad happening, that everything was wonderful. It was the best place that they've ever lived in their lives. And, the congressman and the congresswoman kind of got a weird off-put feeling from this. But everything appeared normal. There was nothing really awry until the end of the celebration. The NBC reporter was kind of strolling along the outside of the pavilion where they were having the celebration. He was having a cigarette when he was slipped a note that said that 2 of the members of the People's Temple wanted to go back to America. Basically, this is where the entire facade of Jonestown begins to crumble at Jim Jones's feet. So this is when everything basically hits the fan and it goes completely awry. So at this point, the congressman had decided that he would round up all the people who wanted to go back to America. And by the time they were done, they had 40 or 50 people who wanted to leave, but the airplanes that they had were so small that they would have to come back for them. So the congressman, the congresswoman, the whole crew, they head to the airstrip. And the airstrip, I don't know how far away it was. It was a significant amount of time from Jonestown because they had to take trucks over there, and the trucks had armed guards and all this stuff. So they took the congressman, the congresswoman, their crew, and I think 14 defectors to the airstrip. So they were able to take 14 people with them, which isn't bad. And I believe maybe 1 or 2 were children because some people wanted to get their children out of there. So they headed back to the airstrip completely unknowingly, ending their lives. So as Congressman Ryan and the congresswoman and everybody boarded the plane, they were actually, according to Congresswoman Jackie Speer, they were actually lifting off, like they were going into the air, ascending, when a tractor trailer of assassins pulled out in front of their plane and began shooting. And unfortunately, there were many lives lost during the shooting. One of the defectors, 3 of the crew members, and Congressman Ryan were among those killed. The others were seriously injured. Jackie Spear and defector Vernon Gosney were severely wounded. I believe Congresswoman Spear was shot 5 times, and Gosney was shot, I think, 3 times. And they actually laid there just bleeding on the airstrip for like 22 hours until help could get to them. But after the congressman was murdered is when everything just went downhill fast. There was no stopping the events that were about to occur. So basically, the assassins went back to Jonestown, told Jim Jones exactly what happened, and he flew into a frenzy, okay? He began screaming for people to get the vat. He ordered members of the People's Temple to pour just tons of cyanide into these huge vats of Kool-Aid, and he began forcing people to drink them. He told them, you know, if you don't drink this, the American government is going to come kill us. They're going to separate us from our children because we've killed the congressman, all of this stuff. He was saying, you know, this is our only option. This is our only escape. We can't go on living anymore. It's better for us to kill ourselves than for them to come here and brutally murder us. But if you ask me, this is the most brutal thing that you can do to someone. So there were many people who did not want to do this, and they were either shot by the armed guards or they were injected with the poisoned mixture. And probably the most sad part to me is that when this all began happening, Jones targeted the babies and the children first. He had them injected with the poisonous mixture, and the parents had to watch as their children foamed at the mouth and died right in front of them. So it was truly a very, very horrific scene, and it's still disturbing despite all of the things that I've read and seen about it. It still disturbs me. So very, very few people survived this, one of which was a woman named Hyacinth Thrash, and she only survived reportedly because when this all first began, she managed to hide under a bed, and she either fell asleep or passed out due to like the stress and everything, maybe shock, everything that was going on. And when she awoke, there were just bodies everywhere, corpses, everything. Perhaps to me, one of the most telling things is that Jim Jones himself did not drink the poisonous mixture. He went back to his office/home and shot himself, which I think speaks volumes about just the way that he lived his life. To me, he was a very cowardly person who hid behind charisma, and he used it to mask all of the fear and abandonment and anxiety that he held on to throughout his life. I just feel like he was a very cowardly person. You would have to be to do something like this. I could never think of a better word to describe Jim Jones than cowardly. I mean, disgusting, just horrific, horrible person. So, like I said, very few people survived. Hyacinth was one of them. But 11 defectors managed to escape. They ran through the jungle while this was happening. One of these people was Leslie Wagner Wilson, who managed to escape with her son Jakari. And it is a miracle that they survived. They said that they heard gunshots, they heard people running, they heard it happening, and they managed to escape and get to the nearby town where they conveyed to other people what had happened, and they were calling family members. It was just a hysteria. Jonestown will forever live in infamy as one of America's most horrific mass murders. And I say mass murders deliberately because a lot of people misidentified this as a mass suicide. That is not what it was. I do not believe that was what it was. You can't say that when the majority of the people were either coerced or forced or injected or shot in order to comply with Jim Jones's demands. 909 people that we know of lost their lives that day, and it is truly a tragedy that we must not forget. So now that I've gotten through the facts and through the story, which is rather long and horrific, I just kind of want to share a few thoughts. So I think that it's wrong to call the People's Temple a church. It was a cult. They didn't know it was a cult until it was far too late, I'm afraid. But that's what it morphed into. I can't say if it was initially at a church. I don't know if Jim Jones planned to be a bad person, like if he planned to do these things, to take possession of other people's homes, to take all of their money, their assets, everything that they had. I don't know that that was his end goal. I don't know that that was what he had planned, but I know that that's where he ended up. So it's impossible really to say what was Jim Jones and what was Jim Jones after the drugs, after the trauma, after the mental distress. I don't know where the two separate. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that in order to commit a mass murder like this and to execute it in this way, it takes a very, very disturbed and evil person. So I don't know that it's important whether or not this started out as honestly a person trying to bring races together, to bridge the divide in America at the time where people were really divided. People are still divided, but in this time there was a lot of unrest, and people were either, we need to integrate races or we should be separate. There was no real brotherhood or commonality between people the way that there should be, in my opinion. So what I'm trying to say is I don't know that it's important to say if he really wanted to do that or if this was all a big scheme that he orchestrated. But I do know that it's important that 909 innocent people lost their lives at the hands of this monster. I just think that it's very, very important that we remember these cases. A lot of people today, young people especially, probably have no real information about what happened at Jonestown. And I think it's really important that we remember these events and that we learn from them and we learn from the mistakes of the generations that came before us. Now, I don't know, obviously we can't blame the victims here. They're innocent people who just believed in a better world. But I think it's very, very important that we learn from the mistakes that were made by every party involved, and that we really take a closer look and examine things, because a situation can be completely different beneath the surface, and we just need to take a very close look at what is happening. I just think it's very important for us to remember that those who do not remember history are doomed to repeat it. Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. And this is definitely something that I do not ever want to see repeated in my lifetime or in any of the lifetimes afterward. I do not want to see this happen ever again. So I just think it's very important to give information and give some insight on what exactly happened and maybe what was going on in the mind of Jim Jones. And this video is so long already that I feel horrible extending it with all of this extra talk that I'm doing. So I may do a completely separate video just on my full thoughts, but I've given a pretty brief description of what I got from the situation. But I just definitely want to say you can leave your thoughts, your opinions, everything that you have to say down below, but just remember to be respectful to the victims, to the people and families involved. So many people lost their lives. It was a horrific tragedy, and that's all I really have to say. Just be kind and respectful. Thank you guys once again so much for joining me today. Leave me a like if you liked the video, comment down below, and subscribe because I make new videos every Monday and Friday. Thank you guys once again so much for watching me today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.